This podcast is a member of the Place to Be Nation family. Visit us at placetobenation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.
Place to Be Nation, welcome back to another edition of the movie review of the day here on the Pop Experience. I'm Steve Riddle, back again for another ground, and today is actually a pretty big episode. It is episode number 50. Yes, we've already hit 50 episodes. Obviously, we got a ways to go before we get to the mark of where we are on, say, the Video Jukebox Song of the Day pod, where we're just over 1,000 episodes. But that, of course, we started that back in 2022, I believe, or 2023. But anyway, regardless, we're talking about, we're not talking about songs, we're talking about movies, and we are concluding our theme week this week, where we are celebrating International Women's Day by looking at a series of films that are either about women, directed by women, just to, that sort of thing. And today's, touching on a kind of a film that sort of, fell through, kind of slipped through the cracks. Like, I remember it fairly briefly when it was in theaters. Like I said, wasn't in there for long, but does touch on a very interesting topic that I don't think a lot of people know about. And the film that we do for you today is Suffragette. At least, or Suffragette, if that's how you pronounce it correctly. But it was released on September 4th, 2015, in the UK, October 12th, 2015 in the US. Budget of $14 million to a box office of 38, so slight profit there. Starring Carey Mulligan, Helena Bonham Carter, Meryl Streep, Natalie Press, Anne-Marie Duff, Ben Wishaw, Brendan Gleeson, among others. It is based off historical events of the women's suffrage in the United Kingdom, specifically at the end of the 1910s. So it was just like post-World War I, as the women of Britain were basically fighting for their right to vote. So as I normally do, I will go through, start off here with the 3 things that worked and 3 things that didn't. So first, the 3 things that worked. Number 1, it's interesting how we see the main character, Maud Watts, portrayed by Mulligan, her journey kind of through this film, where she's, first just, a simple laundry worker. She happens to get caught up in a protest through one of her, that involves one of her coworkers, and she eventually kind of progresses to becoming one of their staunch supporters, to the point that she's becoming very radicalized, and then we kind of which, I mean, at the time, we were in a period of time where around the world it was becoming the rights of women were really coming to the forefront. We saw it. It would be seen in the U.S. as well around the same time. And we talk about how several decades later we see with the civil rights movement in the U.S. how those kind of started peaceful and eventually kind of became violent, and we see it here as well. But seeing women do it, it's it's very interesting. Because there's some brutality in this film that I was not expecting, and to see Maud kind of go from being just a loyal a wife and mother to becoming a in many's eyes a criminal, is quite was quite interesting, and I think Carey Mulligan did a really good job portraying that on the screen. Number 2. The idea that these protests are kind of being, trying to be kept swept under the rug by the media, and the press, again, kind of mirrors a lot of what we've seen over, especially more recent years, where, you see stuff happen, but it doesn't get reported on, for various reasons. And, you forget it was even happening back then too. Just goes to show that, you can't, if your movement doesn't get the right coverage, it can kind of just die a slow death. And I think we see that here is there, they try to be, the women try to be peaceful. That got them nowhere, and now they're having to resort to violence to get the point across. And that's what ultimately gets them the attention they deserve. So it is kind of a bad message, though. So, I mean, because you have to think about the collateral of innocent people being involved, but yeah, they definitely do again kind of a good job throughout the film of showing that. And then number 3, kind of the idea of this whole because there's most of the characters we see here are made up for the film. There's only a handful of real life figures we see, and of course the big one is the woman who was kind of the one who organized this whole movement. That's Emmeline Pankhurst, who we only see her once in the entire film, and that's when she kind of gives a speech to the women to tell them they have to step up their efforts. And then we just only hear her name, and I think that's kind of an interesting route they took. That she was kind of this it's one of those things where like you hear the name, but you don't never see that she never shows her face. I just think, and I think that's kind of an interesting take that they took out. So just to be kind of just so you know, the real people that we see in this film are her, Emily Davison, who basically becomes a martyr for the group when she tries to interrupt the Derby and gets trampled to death. There's also, of course, King George V and David Lloyd George, who was prime minister at the time, who was definitely very. I think he was very sympathetic to the women, but he definitely. But I guess maybe he felt like he couldn't do as much as he probably could have. So now we go to the 3 things that didn't. So number 1, again, kind of, we see, obviously a lot of the focus of the film is on Maud, but I feel like we don't get enough of the other women. Like I know Edith, played by Carter, Helena Bonham Carter, is kind of one of those, supposed to be almost kind of like the right-hand woman of Pankhurst. But we don't see her a ton, which I'm kind of surprised. And then you got these other women like Emily and Violet and Alice, who we don't see a lot. Again, I know this is supposed to be all for Maud, but I kind of would like to see them be a little bit more showcased as well. Number 2, kind of seeing the inner workings of how these shops work, where like at the laundry building where Maud works, she's clearly you can see the women are definitely underpaid, underprivileged, and of course her boss is definitely for lack of a better term, a pervert, because he's been sexually abusing the girls, including Maud. And it seems like they get away with we don't see any we don't see any judgment come to them. Basically, sorry, my apologies, but yeah, we don't see any judgment come to them, which kind of like to see. But I guess there's certain things that they just can't show. So again, I don't know. It's kind of weird. And then number 3. The way that it feels like it just kind of just ends like almost like anticlimactically, like we get to the final scene where Emily gets trampled to death, and then from there just kind of falls apart at the end. Like there's no big we do see kind of classic footage at the very end of a women's march, and then we do end up getting the text at the end saying that eventually women in 1918, certain women over 30 were given the right to vote. They got the rights over their own children in 25, and then they were given the same voting, eventually given full voting rights in 28. And then they showed like all the countries that followed suit. Of course, the U.S. was one of them in 1920. So, but again, the film just felt kind of anticlimactic at the end, where it's like, we get this, this big death happening, and then they do like a funeral procession, but then that's pretty much it. So I don't know, just again, maybe I was expecting something a little bit more out of it. Now we can go to some of my awards. My MVP of the film, obviously, I think I had to say Carey Mulligan. Again, she really portrays Maude in a really, dramatic fashion, where, again, like I said, we see her journey from just, a simple laundry worker to becoming one of the main figures of this movement. And Mulligan, I think, is, I think she's, she was really good for the role, because she definitely has that, kind of baby face kind of look that you would think for someone like that. And she definitely, like I said, she's definitely, coming off of her role in The Great Gatsby 2 years prior as Daisy. She, in fact, this, she continues to kind of build her credentials up here with this film. Favorite character, I think. It's hard. Yeah, it's hard. I mean, that's kind of hard. I think I would probably just have to say Maude, just because, again, we get to see kind of her journey throughout this entire film. I will say, though, my least favorite character is Sonny, her husband, played by Ben Wishaw, who, he's pretty much a stereotypical man at that time, where he thinks, as the man of the house, he has control over everything. Once he realizes what Maude's doing, he then he kicks her out. He, takes her son away from her, going to the point that he ends up, giving him up for adoption. And it's just, he's just an absolute asshole. Again, I'm sure he was probably just, going, acting like any other man would at that time, but still, it's, watching it with 2025 eyes is kind of jarring about it. So, my favorite scene, I would have to say that first bit where where Maude, testifies to the committee about her life, what's going on in the lawn, what she's gone through since being born. And you can see on their face, they're very sympathetic towards her, which makes when they find out that they're still not going to get the right to vote, you kind of see that's where Maude starts to kind of, make that transition. But, for someone who, at that time, when she made her statement, was really kind of, indifferent to the cause, I think Carey Mulligan delivered a very powerful performance when Maude gave her speech. So that would probably be my favorite scene. And then overall grade, it was okay. I think I'm glad I did watch it, to kind of cover, and I think it was a good film to pick for this week. Maybe there were some other films that could have been picked over it, but I think in terms of grade, I'll go 6.5 out of 10. It wasn't like boring or anything. There was enough there to keep it going. It's not that long. It's under 2 hours, so it's kind of an easy watch. But I think it's definitely, of the 5 films that we covered this week, I think this is probably the weakest. And I think, we probably could have ended, for episode 50, I think we could have ended it on a little bit of a stronger note. But, I mean, that's just my opinion. I'm sure there are some that do love it. So, I can't fault for the fact that it was chosen for this week. So yeah, I think that's pretty much all I have to say about it. But that is going to do it for this week, and do it for this episode. Of course, next week we will have our third straight theme week, because on Friday, May 20th of this year, the film Project Hail Mary will be released. So to prep for that, all our films next week will be films that focus on the destruction of Earth. And we've got some really good films, I think, that are going to be talked about, so be on the lookout for that. Thank you again for listening, and thank you for continuing to support us on this feed and all of our other feeds. We got a lot of great content coming, so be sure to continue to give us our support. So with that, I am Steve Riddle. This has been the movie review of the day here on the Pop Experience, and we'll see you next time.
sorrow, sorrow.